Learning Together, A Mass Line, by Jay Sykes, published by Fightback News. In the last article in our series on Marxist-Leninist theoretical concepts, on Marxist epistemology, how we learn theory and practice, we looked at the process of cognition from a dialectical materialist point of view. In this article, we're going to look at how this plays out from an organizational and practical perspective. Theory and practice are linked together, both for us as individuals and for revolutionary organizations and mass organizations and popular struggles. Marxists talk a lot about the importance of correct ideas or correct political line, but what makes them correct? How do we know they are correct? All successful communist revolutionaries have always relied on the principles of what Mao Zedong called the mass line, but it was Mao who explained the mass line both as a method of leadership and as an integral part of the Marxist theory of knowledge. In some questions concerning methods of leadership, Mao said, "In all the practical work of our party, all correct leadership is necessarily from the masses to the masses. This means, take the ideas of the masses, scattered and unsystematic ideas, and concentrate them. Through study, turn them into concentrated and systemic ideas. Then go to the masses and propagate and explain these ideas until the masses embrace them as their own. Hold fast to them and translate them into action, and test the correctness of these ideas in such action. Then once again concentrate ideas from the masses and once again go to the masses so that the ideas are persevered in and carried through, and so on, and over again in an endless spiral, with the ideas becoming more correct, more vital, and richer each time. Such is the Marxist theory of knowledge." In the process of struggle and summation, the masses of the people learn, and the revolutionary organization also learns. Just as we saw in our last article, there is a process of practice theory practice where, together, our knowledge is elevated to even higher levels. This process raises the consciousness of the masses and elevates the understanding of the revolutionary organization as it advances the struggle forward. From the masses to the masses is the core of the mass line. It is important to distinguish the mass line from the idea that the masses come to a correct analysis spontaneously. Some people argue that leadership and revolutionary science aren't necessary and that mass struggles don't need leadership or theory. But the ideology of the dominant mode of production, capitalism, will guide people's thinking in the absence of proletarian ideology, and bourgeois ideas like anarchism or reformism will lead the movements down their own blind alleys. Without medical science, we wouldn't be able to deal with the diseases that affect our society. And likewise, without revolutionary science, we can't deal with the problems posed to us by capitalism. In any situation, there is a complex array of contradictory forces. Dialectical materialism gives us the tools to analyze which of those contradictions are primary or determining, and which are secondary. Likewise, it allows us to analyze which aspect of a particular contradiction is the dominant aspect. There's a lot to be said about contradiction later in our series, but for now, the important thing to understand is that revolutionary theory gives us a tool from which to analyze these contradictions in society in order to understand where to apply pressure, just as geometry and physics allow us to understand how we can use a fulcrum and leverage to amplify force. So beginning with the principle of from the masses to the masses, we see that we have a basic principle for applying the Marxist theory of knowledge to practical struggles. First, we start with where people are at. We look to the advanced fighters in the mass movements that we work alongside of, listen to the demands raised about the masses' felt needs for things like better wages, an end to police violence, and similar things, and, using Marxism-Leninism, analyze the contradictions in play to determine what is primary and to apply leverage in the most strategic fulcrum points. Then we can sum up the successes and failures of the struggle together with these advanced mass organizers to build unity around the way forward, collectively raise our understanding, win over the broad intermediate elements, and defeat or isolate the backwards who stand opposed to progress. The mass line is the epistemological and organizational link that allows the mass organizations and the Marxist-Leninist revolutionaries to advance together, for truly neither one can get anywhere without the other. It is also the key to the fusion of Marxism with the workers' movement, the tool by which the working class can develop its class consciousness and learn Marxism through practice. in order to build a revolutionary movement capable of taking on the monopoly capitalists who rule this country, in order for the working class and oppressed nationalities to take political power and build socialism, the mass line is absolutely essential, and nothing can be accomplished without it. If you want to go more deeply into the mass line, I would encourage you to look at the pamphlet Some Points on the Mass Line. As our series continues, in our next article we'll be looking at the differences between idealism and materialism as we start to break down the nuts and bolts of dialectical materialism. Learning Together, The Mass Line, by Jay Sykes, published by Fight Back News.
Fun. All right, so thanks everyone for making it on to session 4. I appreciate the presence also of a couple more members from our central committee. So Tom and Steph making it on. So for folks in this, grouping, people have questions. Oh, okay, a couple more people in the waiting room. And then of course, thanks so much for being on, Josh. The author of the articles on Fight Back News. So I'll be hosting it today. I know that you all are used to Andy and I doing it together. He's off doing important work for our group. So it'll be me for tonight. So everybody behave. No, I'm kidding. Okay, it looks like we had a couple people who maybe had tech issues. Okay, looks like we're done with it. Well, thanks everyone for being on tonight. So this is session 4 of the series that we had planned. Was just up to 4 for now, but we'll, our next sessions, kind of when and how we'll do it will be to be announced, so keep that in your mind, but we will keep in touch with everyone. But I guess more on that later. So for tonight, we will talk about learning together, the mass line, which is the 5th article in the Red Theory series on Fight Back News that we asked everyone to read. And hopefully people enjoyed it. And then the article also mentions that we've got some other good resources on this topic by our organization. For instance, our pamphlet on the topic, Some Points on the Mass Line, you can't miss it. If you join as cadre, for instance, it's required reading, so you won't miss it. But it's just all in all for anyone who wants to take being a Marxist and organizing seriously. It's just like really, really good reading. It'll kind of give you a lot more like concrete examples of what we'll talk about tonight. So just to bear that in mind. But okay. So without further ado, my name is Chris Carpio. I am on the standing committee of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And tonight we'll be talking about the mass line. So I'll go ahead and just talk on the subject with a little prepared presentation. And then per our previous studies, if people have questions, we'd love to hear them after the presentation's over. So, write them down. You can throw them in the chat too. Whatever will help you remember to find them later. But okay, so diving into it, the mass line. We're tossing around this term. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? If people haven't heard this term before, why do we keep repeating this odd term? So in our last meeting, we examined the Marxist theory of knowledge, right? We talked about how when we say practice theory practice, we're saying that there is a relationship between the kind of particular, concrete, collective experiences of people and Marxist-Leninist theory, and it can go back and forth, right? And it's meant to be brought back to be tested out among the people, right? That's kind of, in our view, how people learn. Obviously, that's going to be really important for any Marxist organization and anyone wanting to actually build a revolution, because if that's how people learn, that means that that's going to be how we're going to teach people, right? So the implications of that are huge, and we've got a method for it. And both revolutionary organizations and mass organizations in popular struggles benefit from knowing about the dialectical relationship between theory and practice, and it's really important for Marxists to understand that. And it's actually how both mass organizations and people kind of in popular struggles and revolutionary organizations, how we will learn together, right? So how we can advance this cycle of kind of ever heightening knowledge, kind of getting closer and closer to whatever truth is out there. It's going to be through this dialectical relationship. So what that means is that when we're coming up with our slogans and our propaganda and our pamphlets, we're not looking to simply just mirror any particular group or whatever is in the news, right? We have a method. So there is a scientific method to the madness, right? Out there in the big world of, there's all these demands, there's all these slogans and ideas. How can we make sense of it? So it begs the question of like, what are correct ideas exactly? Like, is there an innate correctness to anything? And as Marxists, we would actually
This is a guided meditation on peace, presentness, and political revolution. Find a place where you can sit comfortably, perhaps resting your hands on your knees. You may wish to sit on the floor with your legs crossed. Or, if you're not too tired, you may like to lie down on your back. Whatever position suits you. Make sure that your chest is open, and you may wish to allow your eyes to gently close, or find a point in the room where you can rest your focus. Begin by noticing your breathing. Feel your chest rising and falling, your belly expanding in and out. You don't have to change the way you breathe, just becoming aware of it. In and out. Notice also that society can be thought of as being made up of groups of people with conflicting and irreconcilable economic interests, which we call classes. You don't have to change society in this moment. This is your moment, your time. Just notice class conflict and be aware of it. This will be our anchor as we proceed on this journey. And now, let's take 3 deep, relaxing breaths. As you release the air in your lungs, you may wish to repeat in your mind the topics of today's meditation. And with each breath, I invite you to experience a doubling of your relaxation. let's take the first of these 3 breaths. Now, breathing in, peace, and out. Very good. Breathing normally in between, becoming even more relaxed with each breath. Let's take the second breath. Now, in presentness and release. Fantastic job. Aware of your chest, rising and falling. Let's take the third and final breath. Now, breathing in, political revolution, and out. Well done. Don't worry if your breathing doesn't match the sound of my voice. It is all good, and it is all okay. Just becoming even more aware of breath, and beginning slowly to relax. As we breathed those 3 relaxing breaths, you may have noticed a slight tingling sensation spreading from the top of your head down through your shoulders, arms, chest, right out the tips of your toes. This sensation is available to you throughout this meditation, whenever you desire. Don't be distressed or upset if you become distracted by thoughts or sounds in the room. Just keep coming back to breath. The world can be chaotic, and we can lose focus when we think about what we might like to change, or something we wish we could control. But just invite yourself to come back to breath and the model of class conflict. Breathing in and out. As you sink deeper and deeper into this relaxed state of awareness, you may begin to notice the position of your body, the surfaces you are in contact with, the temperature of the room. And you may also notice your body's position in the system of global capitalism. And the air continues to flow, becoming even more relaxed, even more aware. Now, in this relaxed state, we are ready to consider the revolution. As you breathe in and out, receive an invitation to the idea that revolution will look different for you if you are in a bourgeois nation enriched by global capitalism than it might for someone in a country impoverished by it. Returning always to breath and class conflict. When we think about revolution, we may imagine it as destructive or violent. We may conjure images of past revolutions that we think fell short, or make jokes about sending landlords and capitalists to violent ends. We may shy away from this image whether because we are liberals rather than socialists, or because we were raised in liberal capitalist societies that maintain a hold on our thoughts, or perhaps out of compassion and love for our fellow human beings, whoever they may be. Whatever the reason, we may desire to avoid revolution, but simply agitate for reform within capitalist society while maintaining its comforts. But although revolution means a break with the old ways of doing things, it need not be fundamentally destructive, but instead an act of creation. It may be scary or painful, like bringing a new child into the world, but it is the birthing of a new way of life, rather than the gradual managing of decay and bargaining with entropy that liberal democracy has become. This is not to say that we cannot learn from our mistakes or come to an understanding of history. Simply that in considering the revolution, we want our focus to be on the present and not our anxieties about the past. Do not judge yourself if you have doubts. Simply observe them and let them go. We may become anxious or depressed when we ruminate on the past and witness the destruction and pain that can seem to surround us. We can be upset by the wickedness of others and wonder how it is that human beings can have done so many awful things to each other or the planet. Conversely, we may rejoice at small changes that we have managed to win in the past through elections and trade unions in the struggle for a fairer world. But the past is not real and exists only in our memories, in the present, where breath and class conflict remain, and where we want our focus to be. Breathing in, peace, and out. Each breath deepening your relaxation and your awareness. When we are not dwelling on the past, we often project our thoughts about revolution into the future, as if it will be some messianic event, waiting just out of reach, that will save us from the frightening things in our world. But the future also does not exist. It is only anticipation in the present moment. When we think of the revolution as a specific event, like an armed uprising that will take place in the future, we can become concerned about whether our actions take us closer to our idea of that event or farther away. We may become fixated on the purity of our vision, focusing only on the ideal, classless future, and neglecting other forms of oppression that others struggle against in the here and now. Or we may become anxious, thinking that it is an impossible task, or that we would have nothing to contribute, imagining instead that the future this can turn us against each other, or make us doubt ourselves, wondering whether what we or those around us are doing is truly revolutionary or merely reform. It is okay to have these doubts. Simply recognize them and return to the present moment, to breath, and the desire to abolish the class system. By noticing and letting go of doubts, and not judging ourselves or others for having them, we become prepared to take and wield power in the present, to neither retreat into ruminating on how we have been hurt in the past by the current political system, nor project our desire for change onto imaginary future heroes, but instead, in the present moment, to realize the energy inside of ourselves that we can use to lead the revolution. Now, breathing in presentness and out. When we look at the revolution either as a distant project of the future or the redemption of the past, we often imagine it as a moral crusade, springing from the best impulses of our hearts, and someday bringing about a lasting justice. But this way of thinking can also bind us and stop us from seeing a way forward in the present. It is easy to become overwhelmed or disappointed when our own sense of justice is not met, and to become concerned with how the resources of our world are distributed, rather than the conditions under which they are extracted and produced. We stray from the present and class conflict, and it is easy to conflate our moral desire for a better world with the ideals of participation in bourgeois democracies in which we are raised. That is not to say that we must abandon our moral ideals or close our hearts to democratic participation or the suffering of others, or that our smaller efforts to make the world a better place are necessarily a misuse of our time. It is merely to appreciate that a revolution is more than a change in the distribution of goods, or a struggle to get a slightly fairer deal. It is the struggle to abolish the causes of that injustice, not merely its symptoms, which are fleeting and can flare up chaotically as long as class conflict persists. Breathing in, political revolution, and out, aware of your chest, your belly, that tingling sensation in your head, shoulders, chest, and down through your legs. You may become aware that you are holding tension in your neck, or your jaw, or cognitive tension brought about by trying to reconcile the internal contradictions of capitalism. With your next breath, just invite any tense muscles to let go. In a moment, we will count backwards from 5 and gradually return to our normal awareness. But first, take a moment to suspend yourself in this relaxed state, as if deep in an ocean. The waves sway overhead, but you are still and calm. And now we will begin to surface with 5 short phrases. You may wish to repeat them in your mind or out loud, whatever is best for you. Beginning with 5. I am aware of my breath. And now, 4. I am aware of my body, becoming more aware with each breath. 3. I am aware of class conflict, breathing in and out with 2. I am aware of the revolutionary energy inside me. And now, finally, 1. I embrace revolution in the present moment. Fantastic job. If you wish, you can stay in this relaxed state for as long as you desire. Or you may wish to continue your day renewed with this energy. Just remember to allow your awareness to always return to breath and the present moment, and the desire to abolish the class system. This meditation was written and performed by Oliver Thorne and recorded with the help of Manbros Media. Patreon.com/philosophytube is where you can support the show and find a list of the generous patrons who make it possible.
Say no, because, as dialectical materialists, things don't really have like an innate essence. Things are always like changing, so when we say correct, it's in relation to what, right? Like kind of towards like what motion, like what are we talking about, right? Because depending on what the particulars are, you might have like different answers. I don't want to make this too abstract. Basically, Mao helped us by coming up with the mass line, or articulating it as the mass line, which, yes, it's been used to bring countless revolutionaries great success and helping people learn, making revolution succeed. Mao also stressed that it was both a method of leadership and also an integral part of the Marxist theory of knowledge. So not just a tactic, but essential to, how people can learn into the Marxist theory of knowledge, and how to not only bring about a revolution, but how to keep the struggle going past that. And it's basically the idea that all correct leadership comes from the masses and must return to the masses. So that's the basic premise of it, right? Is that all the correct ideas that we're going to learn is going to come from the masses, the experience of the masses, and it has to go back to the masses to be of use, to be tested, to actually make a change in the world, right? Like what Marx said, it's not good enough to just ponder philosophy and the good ideas, but it has to actually change the world, right? And then, our pamphlet, some question, Mao's essay. So our essay, some questions concerning method. No, it was Mao wrote this essay. And it's really good reading for kind of the concepts that we're going to talk about. And I do want to read this quote that was also put in the article, because I think it's just kind of like a really good quote that captures the basics of this. And it's from Some Questions Concerning Methods of Leadership. And it goes, in all the practical work of our party, all correct leadership is necessarily from the masses to the masses. This means take the ideas of the masses, scattered and unsystematic ideas, and concentrate them through study, turn them into concentrated and systematic ideas. Then go to the masses and propagate and explain these ideas until the masses embrace them as their own. Hold fast to them and translate them into action, and test the correctness of these ideas in such action. Then once again, concentrate ideas from the masses, and once again, go to the masses so that the ideas are persevered in and carried through, and so on, over and over again in an endless spiral, with the ideas becoming more correct, more vital, and richer each time, such as the Marxist theory of knowledge. So, in a paragraph, if people needed just in a basic paragraph what the mass line is, that's the paragraph. So we're, it's essential to understand that the masses all have different ideas, right? Like Mao will actually go on later and other essays talk about, you can sort of categorize in relation to an issue people's views as advanced, intermediate, or backwards, but basically people are not going to come towards the one issue the same. Some people are going to come to, like LGBTQ rights from a different position than someone else, or their views on police or whatever. But it's our job to kind of concentrate the ideas that are the best, and we'll talk about what makes it the best, and then take those and then bring them back to the people, and those would be the rallying cries, the slogans based on the felt wants and needs of the masses, that we can try to use to organize people, right? And the masses carrying it out are actually the ones who will be the decider of the outcome. So without them, our great ideas are not really anything, right? So some slogans are clear, right? So Justice for Trayvon Martin, that was just such a clear, slogan that kind of captured what the felt want and need of the people. Black Lives Matter, something as even as simple as extend unemployment benefits now. But some slogans are less clear, right? Sometimes there's more forces in a struggle, and it's not as clear like what ideas benefit the people the best. One example I like to think of is in our immigration work, we use the slogan legalization for all, right? So for all undocumented immigrants, they don't have to be citizens, but they should be able to work and drive, live in the country in peace without fear of deportation. There are other forces, that kind of carry out bourgeois interests that have propagated, well, what about, pathway to citizenship? What about comprehensive immigration reform? Even if we militarize the border a little bit, at least we have some reform. When we say the best ideas, it's what is actually in the material interests of the masses, right? Like, what is it that they not only want, but would actually, be good for them, right? And it's clear that for, the immigration, the immigrant community that we work with, that it's legalization, right? It's not going to be citizenship for everyone. It's just simple legalization, which has happened before under Reagan's administration, by the way. So this is not like without precedent. So that's just an example of like, okay, how can you tell apart the different slogans? This process of concentrating the ideas, it should remind people of our last discussion, right? Like we talked about in the Marxist theory of knowledge, you go from the concrete, particular experiences of people, the perceptual, the information gathered at the perception stage, and then you analyze it at a higher level, and then you take that information and bring it back to, kind of the people, back to like concrete action. So the mass line basically is like the practical application of that. So we collect the information that we need through experience and going out among the masses, participating in protests, talking to people. Yes, you got to talk to people. How will you know what they think? You have to ask them. Like reading what people write, interacting, being a part of the struggle. And then through our discussions, in a revolutionary organization that uses democratic centralism, so we can kind of do things scientifically. Through our discussions, our observations go to a higher level of analysis to find those kind of better concentrated ideas, and then return back to the masses, and those become the slogans. That's why, we take up Black Lives Matter. It's not just as a mirror, it is objectively what the people are saying. It's what will rally them. And it's a powerful slogan, as practice has proved, right? So the mass line is basically how the masses of people learn and how the revolutionary organization learns as well, right? Because we can, before going in and organizing, we can speculate what is the best slogan, but we're not going to know what will actually organize people until we go out and carry it out. It's the masses who are actually the real deciders of everything, and the ones who will make the revolution. So it's a process, it's a cycle, it's got a dialectical relationship. And this is important because we think that practice without theory is short-lived, and theory without practice is useless, right? So they have to both be a priority. It's not good enough to just study. We have to go out and carry it among the people in the world, or it stops here, and it might be dead. It might be dead information, just outdated, right? From the one time you read this one thing. But, and this is the process too that raises the consciousness of the masses and elevates the understanding of the revolutionary organization as it advances the struggle forward, right? So this is it's how, it's how both parties learn. So the masses and the revolutionary organization. We're summing up kind of everything we do, all the campaigns that we do, and debating amongst ourselves kind of, like what was the correct approach. And if we all took the same approach, we can figure that out through debate. So it's important to know that the mass line is distinct from the idea that the masses come upon correct ideas spontaneously, right? So we don't think that it's a spontaneous process. So some argue that leadership, revolutionary science, and revolutionary theory are not necessary, and the mass struggles don't need leadership or theory, like things will just happen kind of spontaneously because the masses do, organize spontaneously sometimes, but we reject that is what will lead to a revolution. The ruling class has control over every aspect of life in the United States. The ideology of capitalism, the dominant mode of production, all of this guides people's thinking in the absence of proletarian ideology, education, guidance, leadership. The bourgeoisie is summing things up all the time. They have the news. They tell people, yeah, the Texas freeze happened because of, Fox News. I had coworkers who were saying this, and it was the first time I'd ever heard it. They were saying the Texas freeze happened because of wind farms, and I can't remember the rationale, but, they're summing things up all the time, and without, proletarian or without communist intervention, it's not going to get summed up differently. So this is why they do so much to direct people towards bourgeois ideas of anarchism, of reformism. They will lead movements down blind alleys. We need to actually work to sum things up scientifically and guide people towards Marxist Leninist theory, right? So it doesn't stop just at organizing. It also takes educating the people who've organized with you and summing things up even further, if they're open to that, right? So the article that people read, it compares the scientific approach to society with a scientific approach to medicine. Basically, without medical science, we wouldn't be able to deal with the diseases that affect society. Without revolutionary science, we can't deal with the problems posed to us by capitalism. And then another important aspect of dialectical materialism and knowing the mass line is that we're always going to be faced with a set of forces, right? It's going to look complex. This is what allows us to identify what is primary, like what contradiction is primary in determining the outcome, what is secondary, and that can help us decide our central task, like what we should focus on. Marxist parties will often have a central task at a time, even as we're doing like multiple things. And we're also able to kind of by the same logic, use it to deter, not logic, but by the same principle, use it to determine what aspect of a contradiction is going to be dominant. So, and we'll get more into contradiction as these studies get deeper, so don't worry too much about it. But basically, things change always in a contradiction between opposites. Knowing what aspect is dominant allows us to know what the motion of the change could be, right? Like if we live in a capitalist society, we're moving things forward, like we're trying to build towards a socialist side, like that's the way things could move. Or it could move, things move backward too. So understanding, kind of understanding all of these forces will help with identifying kind of the force that we're talking about. But we'll talk more about contradiction in the future. For now, you just need to know that revolutionary theory gives us a tool for which we can analyze the contradictions in society, so we can understand where we need to apply pressure to affect change, right? What contradictions we can sharpen or what's going to sharpen. The same way that, we use math and geometry and physics to amplify force, right? So that's kind of going a bit deeper than the mass line, but it's the same philosophy. So basically, in summary, we work from the principle from the masses to the masses, and that's how we apply Marxist theory to practical struggles. We start with where the people are at. We look to the advanced fighters in the mass movements that we work alongside. We listen to the demands raised about the masses' felt needs for things like better wages and end to police violence, reproductive rights, the return of reproductive rights. Like by interacting with the masses, we will know, what the felt wants and needs are, and through study too, like studying what's actually out there and what's correct. And then using Marxism-Leninism, we can analyze the contradictions in play to determine what's primary, concentrate them into a set of slogans or demands with which we can organize the masses, and then we carry it out to people, into the people, going like fish who swim in the sea. So we go out among the people, organizations, meetings, make announcements. That if you're a student activist, you go to a classroom, you make a grand announcement about a protest. Why not? Who's there to stop you? We agitate, we propagate. And in this way, we're testing out those demands to mobilize the masses. We raise political consciousness at our events with our speeches, and we do what we can to put fuel on the fire to advance the struggle and keep the masses unified. So a protest that can turn into a march that can turn into an occupation which can turn into an uprising, right? We want to put fuel on fire. So that's basically kind of, sorry, I know I've talked for a bit, but that's kind of just everything. That's the foundation of the mass line. Some other examples, like if people organize in the anti-war movement, in particular, if people are ever in any of the groups we organize in, we use the slogans, for instance, when Syria was under attack, we used U.S. hands off Syria, right? Because we could unite broadly the different forces who were opposed to the intervention, even if different forces had, like a particular interest in, if they supported the Syrian government or not, we use the slogan of peace, right? Because that was what could mobilize the masses broadly, not just the advanced, but the intermediate too. We could have said, long live the white lion of Damascus, Assad, who, who we do support because his government did, defeat ISIS and, defend the people. But to organize people, we used U.S. hands off Syria. We used Justice for Jamar Clark instead of body cams now, police reform now, even abolition now, because again, this could mobilize a broad section of people. It's the demand that the broad section of people, not just socialists, will rally behind. And in terms of putting fuel on the fire, I wanted to share the example too that, we have Minneapolis comrades, including one who's in this call, our comrades participated in a really important way in the early days of the 2020 uprising, like kind of in those first protests before it turned into an uprising. And some forces wanted to lead people in a march towards the interstate. But our comrades, knowing that the mass demand was justice from the police, actually directed people towards the precinct because of those demands. And that's where the people, kept protesting the whole time. And it turned into an uprising from there because the police began to, threw whatever they had at the people, and people didn't leave, right? And then eventually cleared the police out of the station. So I thought that was like a really kind of great story that shows how by knowing the mass demand, we can actually, advance the struggle even beyond our imagination. So upon our shared experience in fighting, struggle, protests, burning police stations, we can then sum up the successes and failures of the struggle together with the advanced mass organizers to build unity around the way forward, collectively raise our understanding, win over the broad intermediate elements, and defeat or isolate the backwards who stand opposed to progress. And study with people who are now open to anti-capitalist ideas, right? Because there will be people who are open to it if they weren't when we first met them. So the mass line is what allows all our groups to advance together. Neither can get anywhere without the other, and it's the key to fusion of Marxism with the workers' movement. Fusion of ML theory with the advanced fighters of the working class needs to happen, in our opinion, for a group to become a party, and the mass line is what we will use to achieve that. So basically, the mass line is absolutely essential. What we analyze, we have to bring back to the people, and that's how we can determine if it's correct or not, or how to build upon it, and nothing can be accomplished without it. You should read our pamphlet, Some Points in the Mass Line, and if you stick around with us, you definitely will read it again and again and get something new out of it each time. So that's it for the presentation on the mass line. Went a little long, but yeah, hopefully people have thoughts. Oh, okay, the chat was, yeah. Idealism, the no theories, yeah, no problem, Simon. Yeah, definitely Idealism kind of goes hand in hand with, if you don't have anything to guide you, then you will be lagging behind the masses, right? But okay, so with that said, are there any questions, comments, objections? Do people have examples of their own, like times they can think of kind of struggles over slogans, kind of useful? Oh no, you can go ahead and share it, Theodora. Oh, you need me to unmute you? I think I asked you to unmute. Okay, if you don't want to ask, you can throw the question in the chat if you want. Unmuted by choice. Okay, fair enough. So, but if you do decide to ask it, we'd love to hear it, and you can share it in the chat, and then, we can answer it. But, okay, are there any questions from folks? Are we all experts now? Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I had an example from our work of applying the mass line. So I work at UPS, and the facilities where UPS ships out their packages get very, very, very hot. And the company is not fond of providing easy access to water or putting AC in the trucks. AC in the trucks is a huge issue right now. But a few years ago, one of our members who works at this facility applied the mass line, and he went around and he talked to the workers in the facility, and they basically said, we're dying of heat stroke here. We got to do something. And so he rallied a bunch of people, and they led a very aggressive, very militant campaign to get big fans put up all around the facility, and it was a huge success. And that was, I think, 5 or 6 years ago, and the fans are still up, and people are still really fond of them. So I think that's a really good example of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. We could use those fans here in Florida because our comrades also do not have fans in the building. Oh no, Drake. Yeah, no, you should share this presentation. Use the strategies from this presentation and tell them, look, like you don't have to settle for those, take it to, it won't, we don't expect people to just get organize their family or anything, but now you can see a way forward at least. But thank you for sharing that, Andrew. That's a pretty powerful example for sure. Yeah, something as simple as air conditioning will, it's better working conditions, right? That's what that is. Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so my union brother, comrade Eric Bashir, actually just applied to join Freedom Road. There's a story from the organizing the Chicago Transit Justice Coalition. Has right now the Chicago Transit Authority has received tens of billions from the U.S. government to extend the Red Line. The Red Line is one of the major train lines in Chicago. They received funds to extend the Red Line south of 95th Street, which is whole huge neighborhoods of the South Side, which are predominantly black, that don't have access to rail transportation. And this wave of joblessness and subpar wages has forced desperate people into criminal activity sometimes. And the CTA is using what they call a spike in crime and on the Red Line to postpone the extension of the Red Line. And there's a battle being fought between the advanced elements in the Chicago Transit Justice Coalition and some of the more backward elements in the union about how to handle so-called crime problems on the trains. And some of the more backwards elements are saying we need to have more cops on the CTA. But what we're saying is that crime is a social issue. It doesn't have to do with somebody deciding to go out and do something bad that day because they're a bad person. It's that poverty, homelessness, drug addiction, and things like that force people into situations where they don't really see a way out, And while we're putting that line out there to people and trying to talk to people about that, we're also able to expose the way that this monopoly ruling class is using the issue of crime to avoid investing in needed infrastructure that could actually help alleviate some of this poverty by giving people in these transportation deserts a way to get out of there and apply for jobs that might be in the suburbs or in other areas of the city.
Yeah, absolutely. And one important lesson that you all will learn either through organizing or maybe you'll remember it from this meeting is that when Mao talks about elements being like folks being advanced, intermediate, backwards, it's in relation to a particular issue, right? So someone who's advanced towards a particular issue might not be so for another one, right? So that's why when we put out a demand, we want to organize people broadly. So not just the, like our immediate inner circles who are advanced or whatever on everything allegedly, but, forces who think all sorts of things, so, yeah. But, yeah, and that's definitely, when I used to think that, because the liberal narrative is that, like, oh yeah, there's so much poverty and crime because of the social inequalities in society, which is which whatever kind of like low level poverty or crime exists definitely because of that. But now I also realize too, a lot of it is kind of overstated, right? Like it's exaggerated, or it's the only thing you hear about, or like a big deal made about one case, but people dying of lack of health care or of COVID, like in the hundreds the next day, like why is that not a crime, right? So, but yeah, no, these are great examples that people can think of. Yeah, go ahead, Simon.
I think, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I was wondering, like, if you look at what people are asking for, how important of a consideration is it whether or not it's realistic, or like the time frame you think it might have to go?
Time frame. That's an interesting question. Steph, are you raising your hand because you have a possible answer? Or you have a question of your own? Own second one? Oh, okay, got you. Yeah, so to tackle your question, Simon, so, we wanna propose like demands and slogans for things that are real, right? So yes, we do want it to be realistic, right? Even if we think that it's going to be a long fight, right? Because a lot of the times it will be a long fight, kind of, it took years for the U.S. to scale down its aggression against Syria, or at least drop the no-fly zone. And, but even then, they still have like forces there, and there's always attempts to try to kind of escalate the issue. Just because they've shifted to another like part of the world doesn't mean that they have, kind of like stopped the long term. Now there's like the sanctions, right? There's the kind of turmoil caused by COVID. So, and any campaign can take years, basically, but we want to propose things that are real. So when we say the ideas that are the best for the masses, it's things that are kind of material, or they kind of bring dignity to the people, right? Even if it's, not like funds or whatever people are getting, but, like a family getting justice from a police officer getting, put in jail, it doesn't change the whole department, but it's going to bring the family some kind of, like they know that the killer is like off the streets, so every demand should be real, but we should be prepared for long-term fights too. But I don't know if that answers your question, but thanks for the question though. That's a good one, Simon. That's a really good one. Yeah. Okay, so next I'll go to Steph.
Well, my answer actually relates to the thing I was going to say, but I wanted to address Simon's question, because I think that we want to pair demands that are winnable with demands that would force the system to capitalism to change or be altered if they were achieved. So, for example, in 2008, we were working on we were working around the housing crisis and the foreclosure crisis, and our slogan was "Save Rosemary Williams' home," a particular person whose home we were working on, and we were demanding a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions for the entire state of Minnesota. And you know, it has happened before in Minnesota back in the 1930s, so it's not a completely unwinnable demand, but it's also wasn't exactly a realistic demand. You know, because we organize to win all that can be won, but also to expose the nature of the system to people who go, yeah, it should be realistic. We're in the middle of a huge economic crisis. A moratorium on foreclosures and evictions should be totally something that that we should do. That totally makes sense. So realistic in that sense, but not something that the capitalists we don't want to make it too easy on them. We want some of our demands to be things that are hard and painful, or that they are unlikely to be unwilling to do. In my opinion.
Yeah. That they're unwilling to do, but that people need, right? Like we should call for those things, even if we don't expect we'll get it in like 3 months. You know, just knowing kind of what the struggle looks like. Yeah, that's a great example, Steph. Thank you. Oh, the 2008 housing crisis. Yeah, those will be important lessons soon. But yeah. So it's good to have multiple demands, but not too many. So it's good to pair kind of different kinds of demands together. But you don't need like a humongous list of all the different issues, because again, we're not trying to, like just find the most perfect list or something. We're trying to relate to a particular group of people, a particular struggle, or a particular issue at that point in time, right? So, are there any more questions or thoughts or examples people can think of? Even things that are unclear. People have questions like, what line should we take regarding like COVID, or regarding inflation, or coming up with line, how to carry things out. Out of curiosity, I want to ask, is there anyone who has heard of the mass line before? Okay, I see Eric nodding. Yeah, Drake. Theodore. Oh, okay. Sam. Wow, okay. How did you all hear about it? Out of curiosity. Yeah, if people could throw their answers in the chat. Derived from first principles. They're on time, fragments online. Cool, okay. That's really cool. That's really good. Because I think it is something people should encounter and study online. Quotations from, okay. Yeah, reading Mao. Okay, that makes lots of sense, for sure. Let me throw the link to our pamphlet. So the pamphlet is really great, because not only does it actually talk about all this stuff in a pretty succinct, pretty succinct, accessible form, it even has practice examples at the end, like, you are in a workplace and there's workers with different levels of seniority, and how do you unite them around this demand? Because the interests of the newer workers might be different from the ones who've been there longer, right? Like the management might propose different things to both groups. So it's a really great pamphlet. It goes into a lot of detail. Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Here's through work at CTA with Justice Coalition. Here's a way to. I found a way to not implement the mass line. One of the most loyal members of the Justice Coalition, who's been there always for us and has really done exemplary work. She's a member of the Progressive Labor Party. People might not know what this organization is. It's an organization that claims to be revolutionary communist, but they are extremely dogmatic. They do not use the mass line. They reject it. And their slogan for every demonstration is "Fight for Communism." And so they bring this sort of ultra left take to everything. And what this one woman was agitating around the entire time was strike now. We have to build for a strike right now. And we're like, I don't know if we're really there yet. Like at some point that would be good, but that's not where people's heads are at.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So, but again, she does great work, but it's how not to do it by negative example. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Eric. That's, 100% correct. It's not starting with where, if people are thinking of actions they can take and, you talk people on a strike is actually on people's mind. That makes sense. But if you're just kind of, it's like the people who go online and say, like, general strike now, because I made a Facebook event. Like, that's just kind of, you're pulling that out of your ass, kind of. Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
One example, someone said it this way and it stuck with me. I don't remember who it was, or I'd give them credit for it, but it was like, we're talking about from the masses to the masses. A way you can think of like errors around that, or like if you think of commandism, it's just to the masses, right? And if you want to think of like tailism, it's just from the masses. And there's more to it than that, because you have to break it up into the different elements of who the masses are and where you're drawing these ideas from. But the nucleus of it is this idea of like, you're not doing one part or the other, or you're doing one part correctly and one part incorrectly, or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's a great kind of set of examples that you're giving of errors people could make. Are people familiar with commandism and tailism? Is there anyone who maybe wants to explain okay, Simon says no. If there is anyone, okay, so commandism is you're essentially jumping ahead of the people. You're coming up. Oh yeah, you did bring it up earlier, Theodore. You brought up tailism. So commandism is you're jumping ahead. Fight for communism now. Everyone should know this. Everyone should want this because it's gonna be what saves them. But if that's not where people kind of understand the situation, or where they can be led to understand it in the immediate future, then you're jumping ahead, and you're gonna alienate yourself from the movement. And tailism is you are lagging behind the movement. You're kind of picking a slogan that you think is what people want, but what they want might actually be kind of just beyond that. Like you might if you're insisting on, well, body cams now is what the bourgeoisie is saying, and it would be great, and some people like it, and it's easy to get, but the masses don't care about that, and they don't work. Right? In fact, people are really skeptical about them, right? So tailism, you're or like an example, if kind of a classic one people bring up is thinking that only going out to vote will like help. And I'm bringing that as an example. We encourage people to go out to vote. I'm not, like people should not kind of get it mistaken with our group. We think that's an arena of struggle, but there are a lot of Marxist organizations who they only focus on that, right? And that's, kind of definitely lagging behind the people, because the people are willing to do more, and they're gonna do more. So, oh yeah, Steph, your comment is really, really great. Yeah, definitely. So when we say advanced, intermediate, and backwards, the purpose of these categories is, so advanced are the people who are kind of the most ready to fight around the issue. They're coming to all the meetings. They're already hosting their own protests, whether you call it or not. They're active around the issue. The intermediate are folks whose actions could vary based on what the leadership will do, right? So they'll come out to the protests, but if you don't hold a protest, they're not going to organize one of their own. Most people fall in that category. And then the backwards are the people who will try to slow you down, right? Or be the voice of the agent of the enemy, right? So we have these protests to unite the advanced, to win over the intermediate. So that's why we keep saying broad. We're not just stopping at uniting the advanced in order to move everyone, right? And to isolate the backwards in doing that. We're not trying to focus just on the backwards. We want to move everyone. Oh, Kyle has a question. What happens when the demands of the masses are not feasible, i.e. when the revolutionary organization does not yet have the capacity to act on them? Do you want me to unmute you so you could ask that more in detail, Kyle? Or, because I think, could you clarify what you mean by not feasible and if the organization does not have the capacity to act on them? I'll unmute you if you want to elaborate on that. Yeah, you can type it. Totally. I mean when it seems like the reactionary forces are too strong against the desired outcome. Can you give an example, Kyle? Okay. So, and you can correct me if I'm misunderstanding your question, but if it seems like there's a lot of reaction, so Tampa SDS, with kind of the leadership of our group, right, had hands-off Venezuela protests in Florida, a couple of years ago with the attempted coup. We had a protest of like 40 students, right? And, it was very multinational, like a good showing for that issue. But the Venezuelan Student Association, which is a very big and organized student organization, brought out their whole group of 100 counter-protesters. But we outlasted them, right? We stayed out, and they were like yelling slurs, because some of them were quite racist, and so basically, like, there will always be reactionary forces, but we need to go out anyway, and we need to kind of conduct the fight. And if we're organizing people broadly, then we can win. We can outnumber the reactionary forces, but we have to go out and do it. So I don't know if I'm understanding your question correctly, Kyle, but let me know if that's not what you meant. Simon, I believe, asked similar question examples where jail killer cops and abolish ICE. Well, we can win those things. In the case of Chauvin and the 4 accomplices, they were jailed because of the mass movements, right? Abolish ICE would take more to do, but that could probably be done as well. It's just we have to go out and organize people to do it. That's how we will know, how far we can get. Okay, so I'll go to Eric, because you've had your hand up for a minute.
Thanks. I know I've talked a lot. This is going to be my last comment. Another thing that, if we could hit rewind for a little bit, when we were talking about the more commandist organizations, the more dogmatic organizations, I had used the example of PLP. The thing is that we go, the way FRSO would approach something like May Day, would be we go there to see and talk to people that are among the most advanced in the workers' movement, because advanced elements in the workers' movement know what May Day is about. We go there to make contacts, not with just individual workers, but with people who are doing things in other workplaces, and also with other organizations whose politics are intersect with ours in some cases, to talk to them about joint work. You know what I mean? So, but the more commandist, more dogmatist organizations, like I said, like PLP has its own May Day march, and they don't go to the regular May Day march in whatever city they are. And when they do that, they think that they might be attracting the most advanced workers, but what they're doing is that they're walling themselves off from the most advanced workers. They're not in the place that the most advanced workers would be on that day. So if you see the task of party building is just building your own party in a linear fashion until you reach revolution, that might be okay. But for the view of party building that we have, our idea of fusion, our idea that as revolutionary communists, it's our task to bring, socialist ideas to our class and to oppressed nation people, then we can't do without that kind of activity. And that is how we identify the groupings that we might have the potential to unite with through doing concrete work. And these dogmatists, they wall themselves out with that, and that's why they stay sects. That's why they stay at 2,000 to 3,000 people nationwide for 30 years. You know what I mean? That's why those things happen.
Right. And we don't want to make the same mistake at all. And that's why we organize among the masses at all, 'Cause you could easily just choose not to. But that's how you get disconnected from the people. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing those examples, Eric, and the chat being funny. And I see, Theodora, you asked a question, and then after this, we'll maybe take one more question, and then we'll wrap up because we're reaching an hour. But Theodora's question, I guess considering many people want to abolish the police, even though we can't do that right now. In that case, I'd say we build up until it's feasible. Don't take that from me. So, our group, okay, so, people should read Lenin stick with us, and we will read Lenin with you. I promise we're not like shouting edicts at you or anything. Lenin actually identifies the police and the military, so what he calls armed bodies of men, are essentially like the armed extensions of the state. So whatever ruling class is in power at that time, right? So the capitalists use the police and the military to defend kind of their interests. They put down the people. Under socialism, we would need those things too for the dictatorship of the proletariat, right? So we would not be getting rid of the police or the military, just kind of like the principles of it. We would change it because the people would run it differently, right? Like in China, they don't use guns on protesters. Like they actually use like rubber bullets for the way they're supposed to, and it actually takes a lot to get to that point. They use the National Guard to plant trees and forests, kind of do reforesting. Yeah, abolishing capitalist police. So our demand among the people, good examples of kind of the mass line, is community control of the police, right? So, through study, we know that, and as, using Marxism-Leninism, we know that the capitalists aren't going to abolish their armed force. If it's not a public force that's funded by taxes, it'll be a private security force, mercenaries, or, just like a hired force. So we actually think the people should have control over the police, because then the people could actually, by having the ability to investigate killer cops, fire the leadership, control the contract with the police union. We can actually make sure the police do things like investigate domestic assault, so we can still have public safety, but also they're not able to get away with killing African Americans or Latinos and Chicanos, right? So that's actually the demand that we're raising in our work, in the community work, fighting against police crime. So that's kind of the, and we learned it from the Black Panthers, so we actually kind of take up that demand. They could vote to recall sheriffs and deputies to, right, well, the community control of the police would be not just about like voting, because you can currently vote for your sheriff, you know. It would be about getting like having control over the department and the police union. So there's a great source that the Chicago Alliance Against Racist Political Repression kind of wrote up for their, you know, they actually have like the start to community control right now with a bill called ECPS, but they have kind of even more that they're demanding. And I'll put that link in the chat because I think that's a really good bill that they've worked on. Yeah, exactly. Well, we were fighting for more than currently exists. We want actual kind of like a democratic way to control the police, which we don't think we currently have, even with civilian review boards. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
In Frank Chapman's book on Black liberation and socialism, I think he talks about the period of Reconstruction where you finally have black law enforcement officers in the South of the U.S. after the Civil War, and they get to choose how they're enforcing the law and who they're enforcing the laws against. And you see a similar thing now with abortion laws in Michigan. Some of the county prosecutors are threatening to enforce a law from 1931, and arrest have abortions or provide abortions. You know, it's in the courts too, so it's been blocked for them. But, you know, you have real power where, you know, a community a board that's elected, like the one in Chicago, will be in like, I think 11 different geographic areas of the city, and they get to decide how the budget's spent. They get the power to hire and fire. You know, so we're talking real power, but it's also a reform, and we still live in a capitalist system. So as quick as we can gain reforms, the capitalists elect Ronald Reagan and try to start taking them away. You know, going back to the 80s. They began to erode all the things that were gained in the 60s and 70s movements. And that's why we're at where we're at today, is even, you know, Bill Clinton's the one who put more people in prison than anyone. So, just saying, you know, the reforms are day-to-day things we demand, the immediate demands of the people, or sectors of the people. But the revolution has to be built upon, you know, something other than just shouting slogans in the sky.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, Eric was talking about the commandist kind of like dogmatist forces that don't want to organize around, you know, and they criticize us for being what they think is reformists, but that's because they don't understand the mass line, right? They don't understand that there's a relationship between kind of these like short-term, you know, like gains that aren't gonna solve the bigger problem, but also how we can, you know, like get people to understand kind of the long-term struggles, right? Like through engaging in that fight for that short-term demand. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that history. So, you know, there's a precedent and a historical kind of background to the demand that we're pushing. Because we don't think, you know, people were asking questions about what's an unrealistic demand. That's actually an unrealistic demand, is the abolition of the police. You know, the capitalists are, through scientific study, we know that they're not gonna, you know, leave themselves on. They'll change the name of it. You know, they'll say, oh, we're sending public health officials and social workers, but it'll be the same thing. Yeah, and when a revolutionary situation arises, the advanced will not know who they are, yeah. But, okay, so we'll take one more question if there is one more comment. So isn't the main problem with our movements the tendency to tail the bourgeoisie? I know I spoke to the other side of this. Well, What, so are you talking about, like, can you explain what you're talking about?
Sure. There were many reproductive rights rallies in was it early July, and they had different slogans depending who was leading them. You know, it's the Democratic Party in your city who's leading them. What were those? I'm not going to answer all of this. I'm going to ask other people to speak because there's lots of people on the call. What were the slogans the Democratic Party used versus the slogans Freedom Road Socialist Organization advanced? What should students be advancing on campus this fall as we head towards midterm elections? You know, our leadership tends to think the Republicans will win the midterm elections, but we also recognize that you know, they're not going to win it as big as they thought they were before the Roe versus Wade was dumped by the Supreme Court too. You know? So there's struggle to be had there. Our movements can impact a lot of different things. You know? So what's the slogan that we should use? What do the Democrats say? How do we differ?
That's a good question. I can think of a couple answers, but do folks on this call, if people attended, and you can just, you know, like mention any slogans that you saw at protests too. You don't have to, you know, analyze them for us. If you want to, you can. Do people remember what kind of slogans? Or if you organized with us, what slogans we used? Donate to Nancy Pelosi. Oh yeah, great girl boss.
What was the FRSO slogan?
Okay, I know people should know this. So we said, defend reproductive rights, defend women's rights, stand up, fight back. Yeah, we say that all the time. You know, defend Roe versus Wade, keep abortion legal, actually, was what we said. Keep abortion legal.
We won't go back.
Yeah. Yeah. Saw DFL using slogans confining the issue to abortion rights instead of talking about women's and reproductive rights and building a bigger coalition. Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually a big struggle. You know, if people become student organizers or organize on campus, we'll end up organizing together. And that was kind of a thing that we had to struggle with people over was, you know, there was because I guess in college people learn like, oh, the women's movement sucked because it was not, you know, because it just like really like highlighting its flaws. So there was a lot of reticence to connect to that. And we just said like, no, like as materialists, like, you know, like we're not saying women's bodies, right? Like people should know we're not saying that. But we are saying that, you know, like one of the the biggest group of people who will be affected by this, like, are going to be women, you know? So even if not only women are affected by this, you know, the women's movement was actually the movement that won it. You know, it has proud ties to the LGBTQ movement. You know, like we should be connecting all of these movements together. We should be connecting it to Roe versus Wade. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example, Drake. And it was a pretty fierce struggle. And we had comrades carry out the line, and then they came back with reports of saying, oh, the protests went great. We had protests where, you know, there was the Handmaid's Tale people along with like the queerest students on campus, and everyone was just all talking about, you know, the same issue, and nobody was fighting. I was like, yeah, that sounds right to me. But yeah, student debt battle. Yeah. People praising Biden, while backwards are saying all debt cancellation is bad. Yeah, education should be free. Oh, yeah, that's correct, Tom, you're right. Yeah, they wouldn't say abortion. They would only say choice. Yeah. And I think even now there's still some elements that are like, we should just say choice. It's like, no, I think people have moved past that a bit. Practice has shown. But Okay, so these were great comments, great stories. If there are no more questions from the group, then I think we're done. Final call. Going once, going twice. Okay, thanks everyone for being on. So just a couple of announcements. We'll let you all know kind of when we decide to have, if/when/how we decide to have our next sessions. We only planned four for this round, but we're going to kind of look at them, and we want to follow up with people kind of more closely and spend some time doing that. So to be announced, stay tuned, check your emails, and then another announcement. So Fight Back News, our group's paper, we now have a podcast as well. Fight Back Radio. If everyone could please subscribe to it, you'd actually get to hear about our latest episode was an interview with STS about reproductive rights. So you'll actually get to hear in greater detail kind of what this struggle was like. Yeah, looks like we've got some fans in the chat. Yeah, Theodora, we will make sure. Yeah, I think we've got a list of people to follow up with who've indicated that they want to do more. So, and then we'll be communicating with everyone. We want to have our regular meetings. But yeah, so Fight Back Radio. Please subscribe. If you've got Spotify, it's free. Hit it. If you're not lazy like me and you actually download podcasts with an app and everything, then you can do that. I don't know if you could do that actually with Fight Back Radio. I don't know enough about podcasts. But yeah, it's definitely on Spotify. You can find the information on Fight Back News. Oh yeah, it is on YouTube. Thank you, Josh. Hell yeah. Yeah. Subscribe. Okay. And with that, I think we're done for the night. Thanks everyone for being on the call. Thanks for everyone who's participated continuously throughout these studies. I see you guys. I know who you are. You'll be hearing from us. I think it's most of the people on this call, actually. And yeah, we will see you all soon, I am sure. I have no doubt about that.
Idealism or Materialism, Two Approaches to the World, by J. Sykes. When we talk about the philosophy that forms the basis of Marxism-Leninism, we say that philosophy is dialectical materialism. At this point in our series on the theoretical concepts of Marxism-Leninism, we are going to focus on the materialism of dialectical materialism and try to come to a clear understanding of what that means. And to do that, we're going to also look at materialism's philosophical opposite, idealism. Ultimately, materialism and idealism are two opposing ways of approaching every question that we might take up. Many might consider this too abstract a point for revolutionaries to wish to pay attention to, or they may mistake this for some sort of moral judgment about people. The common understanding of these terms would lend itself to such a view. The everyday view is that an idealist is a person concerned with high-minded ideals, whereas a materialist is someone concerned with accumulating or possessing material things. Philosophically, this isn't what the terms mean at all, as we shall see. We need to dispel this view and understand what these terms mean philosophically. They actually connect in a very important way with what we previously talked about in our articles on how we know and how we learn epistemology. The battle between idealism and materialism in fact divides the history of human thought into two camps. A materialist is someone who says being is primary over thinking. An idealist says the opposite, that thinking is primary over being. In other words, a materialist thinks that being determines thinking, while an idealist thinks the opposite, that thinking determines being. Similarly, idealism is dualistic. Separating ideas from matter is two fundamental metaphysical substances. Materialism is monastic, uniting ideas and matter as two components of one social reality. This is the main distinction, though it is still very abstract. We might simplify it by saying that a materialist starts with things the way they are, while an idealist starts with the way they want things to be. But that doesn't give us the whole picture. Let's take each one by one, starting with idealism. Beginning with ancient religious thinking, and even before that, Faced with a complex and turbulent existence, human beings tried to understand why things happened as they did. When there was a storm, the failure of crops, a military victory, or a great tragedy, people wanted to understand why these things happened. With no scientific understanding of nature, often the recourse was to say, it is as the gods will it, or perhaps it was fate or karma that caused things to happen as they did. People tried to understand what it was that made up the world around them. Early idealist philosophers weren't satisfied with religious explanations, and so speculated that reality didn't exist apart from the mind, and that the ideas that made up reality had their own existence apart from the material world, and that it is these ideas that shape what reality is. This tradition in philosophy leads from the ancient Greeks like Socrates and Plato to modern philosophers such as Kant, Hegel, and Berkeley. The world was created from ideas in some way or another. Idealism reigned supreme in the ancient slave societies and under feudal social relations, when the temples and the church were the main ideological levers of the ruling class. The king ruled because it was God's will. One suffered because it was one's fate. If you were born into a lower caste, it was karma, and you were being punished for the misdeeds of your past lives. This kind of thinking served the needs of the slave societies and feudal lords well. But even among the ancients, early attempts at materialism were made. Ancient Greeks and Indian philosophy separately developed philosophies of atomism. They posited that there were basic atoms that made up the world. Some said that basic elements like earth, air, water, or fire, or some combination of these elements, made up the world. Modern materialists like Hobbes, Diderot, and Feuerbach brought materialism into the modern scientific age. To materialists, ideas arose from nature, as human thought arises from our material existence. Nevertheless, materialism didn't really take hold as a dominant position in ideology until the Enlightenment, with the rise of the bourgeoisie. This is why the French Revolution at the end of the 1700s was so emphatic about secularism. The overthrow of feudalism also required the overthrow of the ideological domination of the church. Not only was the political power to be moved out of the hands of the feudal lords into the hands of the rising bourgeoisie, but the ideology of the divine right of kings had to be struck down as the basis of that claim to power. Scientific thinking and secularism were required to push forward the productive forces of society and develop modern industry. Newtonian physics saw the world as functioning like a great machine operating according to natural laws. Everything was in its place and every effect could be traced to a definite material cause. This mechanical or metaphysical materialism didn't see this great systematic machine as dynamic and changing as a result of its internal contradictions, but as fixed, immutable, and unchanging. Natural laws enshrined as the reason things are as they are. Everything to the mechanical materialist is exact, distinct, and repeatable, like clockwork. Mechanical materialism, however, rests on a number of dogmatic assumptions. The British Marxist philosopher Maurice Cornforth enumerates them as follows in his book Dialectical Materialism. First, all change is based on permanent things with stable and fixed properties. Second, change only occurs due to external causes. Third, all change can be reduced to the mechanical motion of particles. And fourth, things exist in a separation from other things as independent units. While the rise of modern metaphysical materialism was a step in the right direction, we are still a long way away from the dialectical materialism developed by Marx and Engels, which will advance materialism beyond these dogmatic assumptions listed above. It does this by divorcing materialism from the metaphysical method of analysis and by uniting materialism with dialectics. Having looked at what distinguishes materialism from idealism, in our next article we'll look at the difference between dialectics and metaphysics. From this, we should be able to get a clear picture of what dialectical materialism is and what it means for us as revolutionaries. Idealism or Materialism, Two Approaches to the World, by J. Sykes, circulated